Chapter 1. Master Su Len, are you saying that you stole someone else's wife and ran away because you were afraid of being hunted down? How can you accuse me of something I didn't do? What do you mean by running away? This is a strategic shift. Madam Elizabeth Jia and I are truly in love. How can you bumpkins know the greatness of true love? Su Luan said loudly and righteously. How can you call it stealing when it's a noble's business? We're in love. Do you understand? What followed was a series of words that were difficult to understand, such as guardian knights, masquerade ball, and a bunch of other terms that no one could understand. The caravan was filled with a joyous atmosphere. In the open wilderness, a caravan was slowly moving forward. Su Len sat in a carriage piled with goods, holding a straw in his mouth as he argued loudly with the mercenaries around him. Next to him was a half-empty bottle of rum. The autumn sun was still a little harsh. An old cloak hung from a sword on the guardrail of the carriage, blocking most of the noon sun. Traveling in the wilderness was a very boring thing. In order to pass the time, the caravan would also talk about some interesting things. The road in the wilderness was rugged and uneven. Even if the carriage was stacked with thick straw to reduce the shock, it was not very comfortable. However, compared to those who traveled on foot or on horseback, it was much more comfortable. Enemy attack. Enemy attack. Defend. Just when Su Len was bored, a loud shout suddenly came from the front. The caravan immediately stopped moving forward. All the carriages began to form a defensive circle with the front of the carriage facing inwards. Looking at these people's busy but orderly movements, it was obvious that this was not the first time. Su Len had already picked up his sword and stood on the carriage looking into the distance. In the wilderness in the distance, a scout was riding a horse and galloping toward them. Behind him, hundreds of black shadows were quickly approaching. When they got closer, they could see clearly that they were gnolls. Gnolls were very dangerous creatures in the wilderness. Adult gnolls were more than 2 meters tall, and the male gnolls were about 2 meters tall. They had sharp claws and teeth, and their strength and speed were superior to that of ordinary humans. They were also bloodthirsty and cruel. More importantly, gnolls were tribal creatures. A small tribe had at least a few dozen warriors, a medium-sized tribe had at least a few hundred, and a large tribe had even more. Gnolls were not the most numerous species in the wilderness. The most numerous species were goblins and kobolds. Compared to gnolls, goblins and kobolds were much weaker. Even a farmer could easily deal with 3 goblins if he was careful. These monsters were useless except for their numbers. Gnolls were not wild beasts. On the contrary, they were highly intelligent and could make weapons and armor. Although their equipment was very crude compared to humans, it was enough to survive in the wilderness. The gnolls in the distance quickly approached. Su Len could clearly see their dark green skin, dirty dark yellow manes, and coyote-like heads. In addition to these gnolls, there were even more kobolds and gnomes. They were probably the gnolls' enslaved cannon fodder. The gnolls had poor discipline, and the goblins and kobolds were even worse. A group of monsters rushed over in a disorderly manner, but when they saw the chariot formation, they could not help but stop 150 meters away from the chariot formation. Whether it was gnolls, kobolds, or gnomes, they mostly relied on human wave tactics. It was because of the hundreds of monsters that they had the courage to directly attack a caravan of more than 20 carriages. Yigas was a gnoll leader. He led a small gnoll tribe. He had personally bitten off his father's throat and inherited it. Under his leadership, the small tribe continued to grow in strength and was developing into a medium-sized tribe. Hundreds of gnoll warriors, along with hundreds of gnomes and kobolds, were a force to be reckoned with in the entire wilderness. He had a total of 30 gnoll barbarians. As an advanced type of gnoll, these gnoll barbarians were taller and stronger than ordinary gnolls. It could be said that he could rely on these 30 gnoll barbarians to wipe out a small tribe. It was also because of these 30 Knoll barbarians that he had enough confidence to besiege a caravan of more than 20 carriages. When they got closer, the two sides began to confront each other. Yiga's cold eyes revealed a hint of mockery. He already felt that victory was in his hands. After the previous long-distance attack, the Knolls were fine, but the kobolds and gnomes were already panting. If the humans dared to directly attack at this time, these kobolds and gnomes would not be able to stop them. However, if the humans really did so, the result would be very tragic. The humans could still resist by relying on the defensive circle formed by the carriages. If they attacked, he was confident that he could directly crush them with the 30 Knoll barbarians. In fact, he originally planned to do so, but the humans were too cowardly and did not dare to attack. So now he could only command the kobolds and gnomes to attack. The two sides confronted each other for a while. After seeing that the humans did not show any flaws, Yiga directly commanded the Knolls to drive the gnomes and kobolds to attack. Sulan looked at the group of bandits not far away and was filled with excitement. In his eyes, these bandits were all experience bags. He had been in this fantasy world for more than 10 years. Until now, he still remembered that he was hiding in his dormitory on a dark and windy night playing Rise of Empires 8. He was controlling Brother Yun to carry the Tsang Emperor sword all over the map to find immortals to increase his attributes. In the end, he was too tired from staying up all night and fell asleep. When he woke up again, he was in this world. He had become the owner of Sulan's body. As for the original owner, Sulan, he was the son of a noble. Originally, he still yearned for the corrupt life of a feudal and medieval noble. However, although Sulan was not an illegitimate child, his mother was a maid who passed away when he was 8 years old. Sulan was so sad because of his mother's death that he could not breathe and died. Then, a soul from another world took over the body with the Rise of Empires system. Although his father was a count, his situation was far from that of his cheap brothers. Compared to those servants, he didn't have to work at all. After recovering, Sulan wanted to change this situation. Then, he began to learn martial arts and knowledge. With the help of the system, his martial arts improved rapidly. Whether it was practicing or sparring, he would gain experience. Just by accumulating experience through years of training, Sulan's martial arts and body became stronger at an unimaginable speed. Moreover, after transmigrating, he obtained 3 initial characteristics. Valiant, greatly increases the chance of activating a sure kill skill. Swift Thunder, greatly increases the speed of attack. Pegasus, greatly increases the speed of movement. With these 3 characteristics in hand, Su Luan's reputation in Kailan City rose in the next few years. In addition, he was a noble himself. If this continued, it would be easy for Su Luan to gather a group of followers and fight for a noble title. However, on a hot summer day this year, the blood father of this body, Count Varner Cullen, decided to grant Surin a baronetcy for some unknown reason when the fire of his life was about to be extinguished. He made Surin a noble with real power. Chapter 2. Even though Varner had one foot in the grave, his decision was still unquestionable. Even though his wife and son were against the order, Varner still wanted to carry it out. However, fate played a joke on Sulan. Before the order was officially issued, Varner Cullen had already returned to heaven. In fact, Sulan seriously suspected that Varner was killed by his wife and son. The new Earl Callan did not recognize the previous order at all, so Surin became a thorn in the side of his nominal elder brother, Earl Callan. What could Sulan do? All he could do was reason with him. Sulan, use reason to convince people. On a dark and windy night, Sulan entered the heavily guarded Thorn Castle alone and found his beloved brother. First, Sulan had a reason with more than 30 knights in the castle and broke them. Count Cullen finally forgave Sulan. After a friendly exchange, Sulen agreed to give up his barony and keep his noble status, while Count Cullen gave up 5,000 kinnar as compensation to Sulen. After receiving the compensation, Sulen didn't stay in Cullen City any longer. He immediately brought kinnar to the northern province and encountered this scene. Roar! Charge! Tear them apart! Roars could be heard, followed by a group of gnomes and kobolds charging over while shouting some unknown slogan. Archers! Get ready! Fire! More than 20 arrows were shot out from the carriages. There were only 60 to 70 people in the caravan, and only half of the guards. Although there weren't many human guards, they worked well together. They used the defenses of the carriages to keep the kobolds outside, and a group of spearmen stabbed the goblins and kobolds to death between the gaps of the carriages. Sulen found a spear in the carriage and waved it around. The spear created a series of afterimages as it slashed across the throats of the goblins and kobolds, causing blood to splatter everywhere. The jackalans, who were supervising the battle, did not step forward. They intended to let these cannon fodder consume the strength of the humans. When the humans were exhausted, the jackalans would attack and tear the chariot formation apart in one fell swoop. A large number of kobolds and goblins charged forward, and corpses soon piled up in front of the carts. Under normal circumstances, the kobolds and gnomes would have fled for their lives after suffering such great losses. However, because of the gnolls behind them, these kobolds and gnomes had no choice but to continue attacking. Soon, the battle became more and more intense. Large numbers of gnomes and kobolds died, and corpses piled up in front of the carts to form a slope. In a short 15 minutes, the kobolds and goblins had suffered at least 100 casualties. On the human side, only 2 unlucky fellows were dragged off the carriage and dismembered. At this point, the kobolds and goblins were on the verge of collapse. Even with the gnolls supervising the battle, it was useless. Of course, they did contribute. At least the humans had exhausted a lot of their strength. Yigas slowly stepped forward and roared at the human carts. More than 100 gnolls behind him roared as well. In the next second, these bloodthirsty and cruel gnolls charged forward. It's over. Damn it. Raise your weapons if you don't want to die. Seeing the gnolls charging, many people were so scared that their faces turned pale. They could not even hold their weapons properly. The leader of the guard saw this and hurriedly shouted, trying to calm the soldiers down. However, the effect was limited. In Sullen's system, the morale of the humans dropped from 80 to 60. If it dropped any lower, there would be deserters. The kobolds and goblins' morale, which was originally 40, instantly rose to 70. The gnolls' morale even reached 90. Seeing the gnolls charging at him, Sulen jumped off the carriage with his spear. With the buff of the Pegasus, Sullen's speed was amazing. The sharp blade of the spear slashed through the bodies of the kobolds and goblins who had just recovered their morale. Without the goblins and kobolds blocking, Sulen quickly confronted the gnolls. Seeing a human charging at it, the gnolls revealed a ferocious smile. They were already about to bite off the human's neck. Rip! The sound of metal tearing flesh and bones could be heard. The 2-meter-tall gnolls were directly lifted up by the spear and then sent flying. Sullen's attack did not scare the gnolls at all. Instead, it made them even crazier. Many gnolls gave up on attacking and directly waved their spiked clubs to attack Sulen. In the end, they were easily sent flying by his spear. The gnolls, whose morale was high, became even crazier. They did not even look at their dead comrades. More gnolls rushed forward again. Whirling cherry. For streams of aura chi appeared as the spear spun. Then, the gnolls that rushed up were enveloped by the spinning aura chi. The aura chi was like countless sharp knives. Countless wounds appeared on the gnolls' bodies in an instant. Then, the gnolls were sent flying back at a speed faster than when they rushed up. Oh my God! Is this real? Sun God above, is a knight this strong? The guards standing on the defensive carriage formation saw Sullen's performance and all of them opened their mouths wide. In just a few short breaths, the number of gnolls who died at Sullen's hands had exceeded 2 digits. After that, Sulen did not have any intention of stopping. He moved quickly on the battlefield, cutting down everything he passed as if he was cutting grass. The morale of the humans, who were on the verge of collapse, suddenly soared. In contrast, the morale of the gnolls fell to 70. More importantly, the gnolls lost more than 30 in such a short time. Seeing the heavy losses of the gnolls, Yigis let out an angry howl and rushed towards Sulen with 30 gnoll barbarian soldiers. It looked like it wanted to surround and kill Sulen. Seeing the gnoll barbarian soldiers surrounding him, Sulen did not have any intention of retreating. Instead, he sped up and rushed forward. When he was 3 or 4 meters away from the gnoll barbarian soldiers, Sulen suddenly let out a roar. Thunder Spear. Then, Sullen's originally strong body swelled as if it was filled with air. With the crackling of bones, Sullen's body grew from 1.9 meters to about 2 meters. The contours of his muscles gave off an amazing feeling of strength. Bolts of lightning appeared around his body, jumping on his weapons and body. The gnoll barbarian soldiers who were close to him suddenly stiffened. Thunderstorm. The nearly 3-meter-long spear was wrapped in a layer of blue lightning. Countless lightning bolts flew out from the rotating spear like a thunderstorm. The lightning balls were like a storm, sweeping across a 10-meter radius with Sulen as the center. All the gnolls in this area were electrocuted into charcoal. Even the gnoll leader was seriously injured. Then, the spear pierced through his throat. Chapter 3. Following the death of the gnoll leader Yigis, there were no more ripples in the battle. The gnolls and kobolds had long since lost their morale and fled in all directions. The gnolls had also lost their morale after Yigis' death. Sulen did not let these gnolls go. In his eyes, they were all EXP. Every time he killed a gnoll, a line of green text would appear in the lower right corner of his vision. EXP plus 10, compared to the plus 1 EXP given by the kobolds and gnolls, the plus 30 EXP given by the gnoll barbarian soldiers, and the gnoll leader gave the most EXP, which was a full 100 EXP. Although Sulen had the Pegasus characteristic and moved very quickly, he could not kill all the remaining gnolls by himself. After all, these gnolls were not slow either. After killing the last gnoll in sight, Sulen looked at the battlefield. At this time, there was not a single living monster left on the battlefield. There were more than 70 gnoll corpses on the battlefield, and even more corpses of kobolds and gnolls. At this time, Sullen's ears rang with a system notification. The battle is over. You have obtained a glorious victory. In this battle, you have obtained an item, Fine Steel X2. Losses, 2, enemies killed, 258 EXP gained, 1457, EXP gained, 300. Congratulations on leveling up. You have received 2 attribute points, 2 skill points, and a silver treasure chest. Name, Sullen Race, Human Level, 12, 136120000, Strength, 26 Agility, 28 Spirit, 19 Vitality, 25 Charm, 18, Your handsome appearance makes it easy for you to gain the favor of others. High enough charm tells you that you can really rely on your face to make a living. Your attractiveness to the opposite sex has increased. You have a chance to get a better price when doing business. Command, 60, when you lead an army, you can increase the combat power of the army. Characteristics, Valiant, Thunderbolt, Pegasus skills, Dark Ice Slash, Lightning Spear Military Advisor skill, Elementary Boost Morale, Bluffing effect is limited, Morale plus 5, Ultimate skill, Whirling Cherry, Proficient, Heroic, Advanced, Torrential Storm, Beginner, Weapon Proficiency, Sword 156, Gun 160, Bow 88, throwing 83. The average adult male's strength, agility, and vitality were around 5 or 6 points. After strict training, they would reach 8 or 9 points. Sullen's attributes were only 5 or 6 times that of an average person. However, the reality was far from that. His combat power was even more ridiculous. With an outstanding physique, a highly proficient weapon, and powerful skills, a terrifying killing machine was born. Originally, according to the Rise of the Empire game, the hero's skills were not limited to these. However, the game and reality were naturally different. For example, the repeating crossbow skill. In the game, the hero summoned 2 ballistas to attack the enemy. In the real world, this skill was different. It became the ballista manufacturing skill. Many of the skills in the system had undergone various changes, but Sullen's current level was too low, so he hadn't learned most of the skills. After learning it, he could use the materials to build a ballista. Sulen had secretly made one before. The ballista's power was not bad. It had a long shooting range and strong penetrating power. He had experimented with it before. The ballista's arrow could penetrate a knight's plate armor when it was 100 meters away. A mountain bear was even killed by the ballista. Of course, such a powerful weapon had its weaknesses. First of all, the ballista's firing speed was very slow. It could only fire once a minute. In addition, the ballista's movement was also very slow. Its accuracy was passable within 100 meters, but beyond that, it could only rely on luck. The most important thing was that the ballista's production cost was very high. The cost of one ballista was about 300 kinnar. It was also very troublesome to maintain it in the future. Therefore, Sulen dismantled the ballista and sold it after making it. In addition to the skills, Sullen's attribute panel had also undergone a lot of changes. For example, in the game, attributes such as strength and vitality would not appear. There was only combat power. Now, it was more accurate. Sulen had studied the attributes on the panel. For example, charm did not only refer to the appearance but also some other conditions. Generally, a person with a charm of 10 was considered handsome. Sullen's charm of 18 was completely handsome. In addition to his strong physique, many noble ladies in Kalen City wanted him to be a guardian knight. Sulen had a strong will. If he was weaker, he might have become a rich man. The title of the book would have been changed to My Noble Girlfriends or The Countess Loves Me. The commander's attribute was comprehensive. It determined the morale of the army and the command of the army. A high commander's attribute would increase the morale of the army when he led it. At the same time, the combat power of the army would also be improved. For an ancient army, morale and command played a very important role. Even a well-trained regular army would collapse if the casualties exceeded 30%. If the morale was high, the limit would be 40% or even 50%. After the battle, the caravan began to clean up the battlefield and help the wounded. Sulen walked back to the carriage with his spear. Although he was not injured, the fierce battle made him feel a little tired. Mr. Sulen, thank you for your selfless help. As soon as Sulen returned to the carriage, the manager of the caravan ran over to express his gratitude with a smile. He met this strange traveler in the southern province. He said that he was a noble and wanted to follow the caravan to the northern province. At first, the steward did not take him seriously, mainly because this person did not behave like a noble at all. Moreover, he had never seen a noble traveling such a long distance without even bringing a servant with him. However, it turned out that he was indeed a noble and a powerful one. Sulen put his weapon in the carriage and put his arm around the manager's shoulder. I'm not helping you selflessly. What? The manager looked at Sulen in confusion. Don't pretend to be confused. I saved the entire caravan and let you live without any harm. Aren't you going to pay me to thank me? Sulen put an arm around the steward's shoulder, then lifted him up and turned him around. He then revealed a sincere smile and said, "Thank you. Aren't nobles righteous, brave, and selfless? No matter how poor a noble is, he is still a noble. Moreover, don't fallen nobles pay more attention to noble manners? How can you ask for a reward?" Looking at Sullen's caravan, the manager sighed deeply. No wonder he could be a noble. If he had been so shameless back then, he would have had his own business. Feeling the pressure on his shoulder and looking at the battlefield not far away, the manager finally took out a bag of money and handed it over. "Sir, please keep it." Su Luan grabbed the bag and tossed it in his hand. It was quite heavy, and he could hear the enticing sounds of kinner banging against it. There were at least 40 or 50 of them. Not bad. Next time we run into something like this, I'll definitely help you deal with it. After receiving the money, Su Len patted the manager's shoulder and promised. Chapter 4. The battlefield was cleaned up quickly. The mercenaries didn't bother to bury the corpses. Instead, they just threw them to the side. They didn't have to worry about a plague since the hyenas would devour the corpses within 2 days. Even the goblins, kobolds, and gnolls would eat the corpses. As for the 2 unlucky bastards who were dragged out of the carriage, their corpses were already gnawed beyond recognition by the time they were found. They could only be burned to ashes and taken away. As for the spoils of war, the bandits in the wilderness were really poor. Most of their weapons were wooden sticks. Only the gnolls had some metal weapons. To humans, the only use for these weapons was to be melted down and reforged. As for the clothes that were stripped off from some unlucky bastard, their colors had long been unrecognizable. They were directly burned with fire. After cleaning up the battlefield, the caravan began to move forward again. However, the atmosphere in the caravan was a little strange. The mercenaries who were bragging and joking with Su Len before now looked at Sullen's carriage with reverence. Everyone couldn't help but lower their voices. Su Len lay back on his horse. He didn't care about the gazes of those people. He was using his consciousness to check the spoils of war this time. He didn't add the 2 attribute points. His current physical fitness was stronger than a knight commander's, so he didn't need to add any points for now. He planned to use the 2 skill points to choose 2 skills later. He opened the system storage. The system storage wasn't big, only 1 cubic meter. There were more than 6,000 kinnar, 2 metal ingots, and a silver treasure chest. The 2 metal ingots were spoils of war from the battle. They were refined steel ingots. The quality of the refined steel ingots produced by the system was much better than the well-tempered steel ingots. They could be used to make weapons and tools. Many of the materials for the ballista were made from refined steel ingots. Sullen's weapon was made from iron ingots mixed with some refined steel ingots. It wasn't damaged even after killing the gnolls. These 2 refined steel ingots could be used to make several weapons. Su Len put the refined steel ingots aside and rubbed his hands. He was ready to open the treasure chest. There were a total of 5 types of treasure chests in the system. The lowest grade was black iron, followed by bronze, silver, gold, and finally purple gold. Inside the treasure chest, Shifeng could obtain various tools from the Legend of the 3 Kingdoms. Of course, he could also obtain skills and mounts. Previously, the highest treasure chest he had opened was only bronze rank. This was the first time he had obtained a silver treasure chest. He clicked on it, and after a burst of light and shadow effects, an item appeared in the box. It looked like a piece of armor. Beast Mask Armor, an armor forged from 100-year refined iron. It is durable yet light. It is a rare treasure armor. Defense plus 15. Additional effect, Body Harden. Hardened body, reduces damage received. Equipment requirement, level 12. Sullen's eyes lit up the moment he saw the effect of the Beast Mask armor. This armor was perfect for him to wear, and it even had the special effect of body hardening. After wearing it, any attack that did not reach a certain level of strength would not be able to break through his defense. Learning the special effect also required skill points, and it was much more expensive than learning the skills. When Su Len first came to this world, he had 3 special effects. However, only one of them could be used, and the other ones were activated by him using skill points. Now that he had the special effect of body hardening, Su Len estimated that if he met the gnolls again, they would not be able to break through his defense. There were only 2 skill points, so Su Len chose to use 1 skill point to learn, heal. The skill's introduction was very simple. After using it, it would heal the user quickly and restore a small amount of HP. Heal could still be leveled up, but Su Len looked at it. Leveling it up required 2 skill points, so he could only put it aside for the time being. In the following days, the caravan did not encounter any more bandits. Perhaps it was because Su Len had killed too many of them last time. The bandits knew that he was a ruthless character, so they very tacitly hid at the side and let the caravan pass safely. Without the bandits, Su Len did not have a way to quickly gain experience. He could only do some basic training every day. Relying on the little experience he had from Karen, it could be said that leveling up would take years. If he did not leave Karen City, he could only rely on daily training to gain experience and level up. After following the caravan for another 3 days, the atmosphere in the caravan was a little dull. Su Len was bored and could only lie in the carriage and read the popular novel, Night Aubin. Chapter 1, The Landlady. Finally, on the 3rd day, they saw a black line in the distance. As the carriage moved forward, the line became bigger and bigger. It was the city wall. After seeing the city wall, the entire caravan became excited. Anyone who walked in the wilderness for 10 days or half a month would be very eager to enter the city. The road under their feet soon became flat, and the number of pedestrians on the road gradually increased. An hour later, the full view of Cult City appeared in front of Su Len. Cult City, the most prosperous city in the northern province. The city was first built to defend against the barbarians and orcs in the north. After hundreds of years of development, the city was no longer the front line. But even if it was no longer the front line, one could still vaguely see the past glory of the city. The city wall was more than 10 meters tall and was built with bricks. Every few meters, there would be a protruding lookout tower. These lookouts would play a great role in war. With these lookouts, the city wall became a bastion. The besiegers would be attacked from 3 sides. The moat outside the city wall was directly dredged and transformed. With enough soldiers and food, it would take hundreds of thousands of soldiers a year and a half to take down such a strong city. The caravan slowly moved forward. As they got closer, the mottled traces on the city wall could be seen clearly. The flag with a sword and shield crossed on the city wall fluttered in the wind. That was the symbol of the Savoy family, the overlord of Cult City. The Savoy family was one of the 4 marquis families in the Kingdom of Florence. They also had the right to inherit the throne. Of course, 1/5 of the nobles in the Kingdom of Florence had this right. The caravan slowly moved forward. As the most prosperous city in the northern province, the business here was very prosperous. Furs from the north, gemstones from the Kingdom of Lorraine, iron from the Kingdom of Dwarves, female slaves and dates from the Desert Kingdom were all gathered here. The arrival of large numbers of caravans made this pearl of the northern regions even more prosperous. Every year, Cult City's tax revenue alone was a shocking amount of wealth. 2 teams of armored soldiers stood guard at the city gate. Their cold expressions, shiny armor, and sharp spears were a constant reminder that this city had a powerful defense force. An alarm bell hung on the top right corner of the city gate. Once the bell was rung, a large number of soldiers would come to support within 15 minutes. After paying the entrance tax, the caravan slowly entered the city with a certificate issued by the tax official. Chapter 5. After entering Cult, Sulen parted ways with the caravan. The caravan continued on its way to the market while Sulen headed to the inn first. He pushed open the door of the inn and was greeted by the noise and the smell of ale. The air was a little muddy. It was the afternoon, and the inn's business had just begun. Sulen's arrival did not attract any attention. Under the guidance of a waiter, Sulen went to a room on the second floor and rested for a while before going downstairs. A cup of ale. And something to eat. Sulen came to the counter and tossed a NAR to the waiter. Catching the NAR, the hotel owner took a look at it and put it away with a smile. "No problem. Here's your ale. We have roast lamb chop, stewed beef with mushroom and potato, and pork pies. These are all our signature dishes. What would you like to have?" "A roast lamb chop, please." "Please wait a moment. Your order will be here soon." The waiter turned around and shouted. "Bill, where the hell are you? Hurry up and give this gentleman a roast lamb chop." Soon, a roast lamb chop was served. Sulen tasted it. It was indeed delicious. At least it was better than sleeping in the wild. After wolfing down the food, Sulen drank a mouthful of ale with a satisfied look. He leaned against the table to digest the food while listening to the people in the inn bragging. Sulen didn't live in a high-end hotel. Most of the people here were mercenaries. At this time, the tavern was almost full. The sound of drinking, playing cards, chatting and the fierce scolding of the maids all mixed together, making the tavern very lively. The mercenaries who had returned safely from their missions all needed to vent their frustrations. They brought news from all over the place. Although most of the news was just the mercenaries bragging, some of it was still useful, such as local prices and information about the surrounding cities. A standard military longsword cost 10 kinnar. It was made of well-tempered steel without any extraordinary enchantments. Some black steel was added to increase the weapon's toughness. It was cheaper than the price in Kalen City. It was a half-body chainmail, made with the same quality of well-tempered steel, without any enchantments. The price was 70 gold nars. This price was equivalent to 3 years of savings for a commoner. An ordinary building in the outskirts of Kalen City cost 50 kinnar. As for the more advanced plate armor, the price of full-body armor was 400 to 500 kinnar. Only knights could afford to use this kind of high-quality plate armor. Moreover, due to the high price of plate armor, most of the knights' plate armor was passed down from their ancestors. Therefore, when you see a knight wearing their ancestral armor on the battlefield, you don't have to be surprised at how much they value their family's honor or tradition. In fact, they just don't have the money to buy a new one. Sulen now had more than 6,000 kinnar coins, which could only equip a team of 50 fully armed soldiers at most. Of course, if he used them to recruit those who were only issued with a spear and leather armor, he could recruit 500 or even more. However, the gap between the two sides was huge. Those fully armed soldiers could probably crush the militia with a single charge. Sulen came here to get a piece of land and a title. As a noble, there were many ways to get a title. The simplest was to be reincarnated into a good family and inherit the title directly from their father when they came of age. Of course, this required you to be the eldest son. The second way was to join the army and gain enough merits on the battlefield. If you didn't die on the battlefield, you could be conferred the title of baron and be given a piece of land by the king when it was time to reward you. The third method was very practical. First, you had to be handsome and in good health. It would be best if you could reach the level of a knight. Then, you had to find a countess whose husband had died. If you could successfully marry her, then you would have both a title and a territory. Sulen had already found a target, but because of Earl Kalen, he had no choice but to bid farewell to the countess with tears in his eyes. The fourth was an expansion order. You had to find a noble who could give out expansion orders and spend money to buy one. Then, you'd bring people to the wastelands and conquer a piece of land. As long as you could survive, you'd become a landed noble and your territory would be much larger than other nobles. High profits naturally came with high risks. Expanding the wastelands required a lot of resources, and not only were there gnolls, kobolds, and goblins, there were trolls, ogres, magical beasts, lizardmen, orcs, barbarian tribes, and even dragons. If you weren't careful, your territory would be conquered and all your investments would go down the drain. If you were unlucky, you'd even become food for the monsters in the wastelands. If you weren't willing to do any of these, there was another option. That was to become a knight and swear allegiance to a great noble. Then, you'd be granted a knighthood and a knight's manor. Of course, as a knight of this noble, you'd have to serve him for life and fight for him. Sulen naturally didn't want to become someone's vassal. Once he swore allegiance to someone else, it wouldn't just be for one generation, but for all his descendants. As long as they inherited his title, they'd be the vassal of that noble. It wasn't just a lifetime of servitude, but a lifetime of servitude. Of course, this method was very attractive to commoners. As for participating in wars and making contributions in wars, most of the land in the kingdom had been given out. Even if Sulen made enough contributions in wars, the land awarded to him wouldn't be that big. There was a high chance that he'd get a small town, and the area would be pitifully small. He didn't want to risk his life and be rewarded with a small town in a remote area. Don't think it's impossible. With the nature of those nobles, the probability of this ending was as high as 99%. If the first, second, third, and fifth were not suitable, then Sulen's only option was to buy an expansion order. After putting his luggage in his room, Sulen took his noble badge and his long sword and walked out of the inn. He crossed the muddy street and came to the bustling street. He found a well-defined stone on the side of the road. Sulen skillfully rubbed his feet on it a few times to get rid of the mud on the soles of his shoes. His destination this time was the noble parliament in Cult. The expansion order could only be bought there. Other than the expansion order, one could also donate noble status. Of course, this noble status didn't come with a land or a title. It was only an honorary title. Even so, many big merchants were willing to pay for it. Every year, the noble parliament earned a lot of gold coins for the kingdom. It was also an important source of funding for the royal family. The gold coins from the expansion orders and honorary noble status sold by the noble parliament were split equally between the royal family and the local nobles. Chapter 6. The location of the aristocratic parliament was not difficult to find. It was in the square next to the city lord's mansion. The aristocratic parliament's residence was second only to the temple and the city lord's mansion in this city. The whole building was located on a 3-story base. In front of it were 12 large granite pillars with a diameter of 1 meter, and above them was a hemispherical dome. The stone pillars were carved with heroes in the history of the Kingdom of Florence, and the reliefs on the walls were important historical events since the founding of the Kingdom of Florence. The entire aristocratic parliament looked magnificent. At the main entrance were 2 bronze statues riding horses. They were Charlemagne and Wilson. These 2 men were the strongest legendary knights in the history of the kingdom, and also the highest commanders of the kingdom. The 2 statues stood up on their horses, holding long spears and pointing to the front, as if they were leading the thousands of soldiers and horses to battle. The bronze statues were 4 to 5 meters tall, and the carvings were very detailed and lifelike. At first glance, they looked majestic. There was no need to ask to know that they were made by a master. Sulen walked up the steps quickly, and was stopped by a guard when he stood at the gate. "Sir, this is the aristocratic parliament. What can I do for you?" Sulen took out his aristocratic badge and handed it to him. "I want to buy an expansion order." The guard took the aristocratic badge and carefully identified it. The pattern on it was indeed real, and only then did he return the badge to Sulen. "Sir, please come with me." The guard made a gesture of invitation, and then led Sulen into the aristocratic parliament. When he came into the hall, Sulen realized how magnificent the hall was. The whole hall was at least 500 square meters, and its height was more than 10 meters. The whole hall was covered by a hemispherical dome. What was more surprising was that there was not a single pillar in such a spacious hall. On the dome of the hall, there was a mural depicting the founding war. It was also because of this war that the Kingdom of Florence defeated the invaders and gained independence. More than 10 clerks were busy with something in the hall. Sulen and the guards did not disturb these people. Led by the guards, they came to Sulen and came to an exquisitely carved ironwood door. At the sight of this wooden door, Sulen was also shocked. The ironwood of this wooden door was not cheap. It could only be found in the north. It was as hard as iron and was not easily deformed or burned. It was only a quarter of the weight of iron and steel. However, it grew slowly. Generally, it was used to make advanced shields. Such a large piece would take at least 50 years to grow. The guard knocked on the door, but there was no response. After a while, the guard knocked harder. This time, there was finally some movement in the room. "Come in." A lazy voice came from behind the door. The two pushed the door open and entered. The room did not look luxurious. There was a mahogany desk, a few bookshelves, and a few high-back chairs placed opposite each other. At this time, there was a fat middle-aged noble sitting behind the desk. Judging from his dazed eyes, the red mark on the side of his face, and the sparkling liquid on the corner of his lips, he was sleeping just now. "Mr. Aria, this gentleman is here to buy an expansion order." The guard pointed at Sulen. "Buy an expansion order?" Aria looked at Sulen in surprise. He did not even bother to wipe the mucus from the corner of his eyes. He could not help but be surprised. After all, he could not sell more than a few expansion orders in a year. Although the expansion order looked good, there were only a few successful ones. Most of the nobles who bought the expansion order gave up their territory and came back with their tails between their legs. "Yes, Mr. Aria." Sulen smiled at Aria. "Kid, don't blame me for not reminding you. Don't think that it's not a big deal to expand your territory just because you read a few night novels. You should know that there are at least 800 abandoned territories in the wilderness, if not 1,000, Aria said as he looked at Sulen. "Thank you for reminding me, Mr. Aria. I know very well what I am doing," Sulen said calmly. "Well, don't blame me for not reminding you when the time comes." Aria shrugged, then took a piece of parchment with a stamp from the bookshelf behind him. He picked up a quill and wrote a line of cursive letters on the blank space of the parchment, then handed it to Sulen. "Sign your name and pay 500 kinnar." Sulen picked up the quill and signed his name on the parchment, then put a bag of kinnar on the table. Aria put the kinnar on a scale and weighed it. After making sure that the amount was correct, he picked up the stamp and stamped the parchment. "Well, kid, take your expansion order and go. Good luck." Sulen took the expansion order and thanked Aria, then turned around and left the noble meeting. Next, he needed to recruit a group of people. Expanding a territory was not an easy task. He needed to prepare a large amount of kinnar. In addition to recruiting a territorial guard, he also needed to buy food, tools, medicine, and so on. When the territory was first stabilized, he also needed to buy slaves for farming. It was not that he did not want to recruit free people, but very few of them were willing to follow the nobles to new territories. Although the nobles would offer all kinds of benefits to free people, very few of them were willing to go. Only bankrupt farmers or unemployed refugees would be tempted. After all, the mortality rate of expanding a territory was too high. Looking at the time, Sulen did not go to the slave market. Instead, he went back to the inn to rest. Early the next morning, Sulen had a simple breakfast at the inn, then spent a silver to rent a carriage and went to the slave market. The slave market was located on the other side of the city. After half an hour, the carriage stopped at the entrance of a lively market. Su Len jumped off the carriage and walked into the slave market. The northern province was located at the border of the kingdom, and there were many demi-human tribes and tribes that were still primitive. Every year, the kingdom's army would engage in local wars with these tribes and tribes, obtaining many captives from these wars. This was also one of the sources of slaves in the slave market. There were also professional slave hunters who went to the wilderness to capture slaves. Of course, there were also unlucky people who couldn't pay their debts and were sold as slaves. Walking into the slave market, Abel was greeted with an unpleasant smell. It was like all kinds of excrement that had been soaked in water and then heated up and fermented. Dirty water flowed on the ground. On both sides of the road, there were some slave traders loudly selling their goods. Behind them, there were many thin and dirty slaves locked in cages. Most of these slaves were naked, with only a dirty rag covering their crotch area. Many of them had whipping marks on their bodies, and their eyes were dull and lifeless. They were the lowest class of slaves. Chapter 7. Seeing Sullen's clothes, the surrounding slave traders all came forward to introduce him. However, Su Len had no interest in these low-level slaves. If he used these people as territorial guards, even a group of goblins and kobolds would be able to defeat them. After sending these slave traders away, Su Len walked deeper into the slave market. Naturally, the slave market didn't only have such low-level slaves. Inside the market, the environment was much better. At least there were no dirty excrements on the road. The slaves here looked clean and tidy, and the slave traders weren't as enthusiastic as before. They would only answer when asked. The slaves here were all trained and could be bought to work. The price was around 3 kinnar. If Su Len wanted to buy slaves for farming, these were the best choices. In addition to these slaves, there were also some who were proficient in a skill. These artisan slaves were more expensive, ranging from 5 kinnar to 50 kinnar. In the tents behind the slave traders were the most popular female slaves in the market. Su Len went in to take a look. The scene inside gave him the feeling of a Japanese movie from his previous life. It was all white and only covered the important parts. The prices ranged from 5 kinnar to 200 kinnar. As for elven slaves, there were basically none. Ever since the Jadeite forest was closed, no elves had appeared on the continent for a long time. Su Len used his strong willpower to get himself out of the tent. He was afraid that if he stayed any longer, he wouldn't be able to resist the urge to buy a few 200 kinnar slaves. He forced himself not to look back. Su Len went to the special slaves next to him. The slaves here were all demi-humans. For example, the northern barbarians, centaurs, orcs, and so on. Sullen's target was the northern barbarians. The northern barbarians were not a race, but a collective name for the northern barbarians. There were many tribes living in the northern wilderness. These tribes were backward and barbaric. The northern barbarians included the alpine barbarians, the Icefield barbarians, and so on. These barbarians looked similar to humans. They were tall and were generally 1.8 meters tall. Some of them were over 2 meters tall. Some barbarians could become elite warriors through systematic training. The nobles of the northern provinces had more or less barbarian soldiers. One shouldn't think that these soldiers were unreliable. In fact, the loyalty of these barbarian soldiers wasn't bad. This was because the barbarians were divided into tribes. Therefore, in the eyes of these barbarians, other than their own tribe, all other tribes were enemies. There was no hesitation when it came to killing people from other tribes. The lowest price for a well-trained barbarian soldier was 35 kinnar. The cruel environment had given these barbarians a strong physique. If one didn't take into account the weapons, equipment, and numbers into consideration, ordinary people were no match for these barbarians. A barbarian soldier would need at least 35 kinnar. Including the weapons and equipment, a set of qualified barbarian soldier would cost about 150 kinnar. Even if I went bankrupt, I would only be able to equip 30 elites. Sulen said with a frown. He only had a little more than 5,000 gold coins left. He kept some to buy other things, and the rest was to buy slaves. 30 elite soldiers. It would be a pipe dream if they wanted to open up a new territory. Unless these elite soldiers were all at the knight level. Knights only needed to be loyal to a big noble to get a manor and noble status. They wouldn't want to open up a new territory with you. As for the remaining kinnar, Sulen was going to buy food and equipment for opening up a new territory. In addition to these barbarians, there were also beast men in the slave market. The most popular ones were the cat and fox races. One had to know that the females of these two races were very beautiful. Moreover, those furry ears and tails were more attractive to some people. Sulen's wish was to buy a cat maid and a fox tail maid. However, after considering the issue of territory, he could only reluctantly give up. Just when Sulen was thinking about which kind of slaves to buy, he suddenly saw a group of strange slaves on the side of the road. The other slaves were either strong or skilled. However, these slaves in front of him were interesting. They were all young and old. At a glance, he could tell that these slaves had families to feed. Under normal circumstances, there weren't many slaves with families. This was because these kinds of slaves were not easy to sell. Many people bought slaves because the cost of slaves was low and they could make money for them. However, slaves with families were not cost-effective. If there was labor, it would be fine. If there was no labor, the slave would be a burden to the buyer. It might even be a loss. Of course, it wasn't that slaves with families were not popular. For example, some craftsmen with special skills would buy these slaves along with their families in order to make them work hard. However, these slaves in front of him were not craftsmen. They were a group of barbarians. Barbarians were also a kind of barbarian. Most of them were about 2 meters tall. They were strong and were excellent warriors. Moreover, these barbarians had a special profession, berserker. Berserkers had the berserk skill. After berserk, a berserker was a killing machine on the battlefield. However, berserkers had a well-known shortcoming. After berserk, they had no discipline at all. They only had one thought, recklessness. This was a disaster for human armies that emphasized discipline. There were once people who coveted the strength of berserkers and incorporated them into the army. As a result, these guys completely ignored their camp after berserk and charged forward. The enemy's formation was messed up by them. As a result, the enemy's general seized the opportunity and sent cavalry to bypass these berserkers and directly attack the enemy. When the marshal was captured, the berserkers were still charging forward. Therefore, from then on, berserkers were rejected from joining the army. Even if they joined, they would be in the cannon fodder camp or the kamikaze camp. These soldiers were used to carry out the charge or cover the rear. Basically, there were no lives in the army. They didn't need to do anything else. It was also because of this that powerful barbarian slaves like berserkers were a little embarrassed. As one-time consumables, they were too expensive. This group of barbarians in front of him was even more so. In addition to the warriors, there were also many old people and children. This made this group of barbarians very unpopular. Although these berserkers couldn't participate in army battles, they were very suitable for small-scale battles. Sulen's territory was also very suitable. In any case, the tribes in the wilderness also had no discipline. Both sides were at the same level. No one was worse than the other. At this time, it depended on personal strength. These barbarian berserkers weren't afraid of anyone in a battle of the wilderness. There was another more important reason, and that was that these berserkers were very cheap. This was the main reason. Chapter 8. Khan had been having a headache recently. As a slave trader, he had a batch of slaves that had fallen into his hands recently. Just last month, he had been cheated by someone. Last month, when he had just entered the trade, a slave trader had sold his slaves to other slave traders because he owed a huge debt and could not pay it back. There were more than 100 barbarians among them. At that time, these barbarians had families to feed. Although they were strong, no one cared about them. In the end, he had gotten a bargain. In Khan's opinion, it would be easier to control them if they had families to feed. With the old, weak, women, and children in his hands, these barbarians would not betray him. Selling these powerful barbarians to the nobles as private guards was definitely the best choice. Therefore, he spent more than half of his kinnar to buy this group of barbarians. After buying this group of barbarians, Khan began to promote this group of barbarians everywhere. However, the results made him feel as if he had fallen into an ice cave. No one was willing to buy these barbarians. Even if he sold them at a price lower than what he had paid for them, no one cared. There were more than 100 barbarians, and each one had a bigger appetite than the other. In a month, he had not sold a single slave. Instead, he had lost a large amount of food. After asking around, he found out that because the barbarians had gone berserk, no one would buy them as guards. This meant that this batch of slaves had fallen into his hands. What made him even more worried was that he was almost out of money. If he could not sell this batch of slaves, he might have to go home and inherit his father's business at the end of the month. His bold words of wanting to start a business were all for naught. "Are you selling these slaves?" Sulen looked at the slave trader who was in a daze and asked. "Yes, of course. You want to buy slaves?" Khan stared at Sulen with shining eyes. His gaze made Sulen's hair stand on end. "Yes, how much are these slaves?" Sulen pointed at the group of barbarians next to him. "Sir, you really have a good eye. My slaves are definitely the best in the slave market. You see, such a strong warrior only costs 10 kinnar. You can't find a slave with a lower price than mine in the entire slave market." Khan enthusiastically introduced Sulen to him, fearing that he would run away. Sulen looked at these barbarians. About a quarter of them were male warriors, and the rest were old, weak, women, and children. The male warriors had many wounds on their bodies. At a glance, one could tell that they were elite warriors. Although this slave trader was full of nonsense, these slaves were really good. 10 kinnar? Are you still asleep? Sulen glanced at Khan with a faint smile. Are you treating me as a rich guy? These berserkers are completely useless. You actually want 10 kinnar? Keep them for yourself. After that, Sulen turned and was about to leave. Seeing that the slave trader was about to leave, Khan didn't care about anything else. He grabbed Sulen and said, "Sir, the price is negotiable. Don't be in a hurry to leave." "Why don't I leave? Waiting to be cheated by an unscrupulous merchant like you?" Sulen struggled to break free from Khan's arm. 7 kinnar, 7 kinnar. Khan quickly said when he felt the struggling strength in his hand. 7 kinnar? If this price is still acceptable, but I only want those adult warriors. Sulen stopped struggling and said. This. Khan was a little confused. Sir, those women and children are the warriors' families. If they don't have their families, they won't be able to work for you with peace of mind. What's the use of these old and weak women and children? I have to spend money to feed them. I don't have so much food to feed them. Since you insist on selling them together, you can keep them. After that, Sulen once again pretended to leave. 6 kinnar. Seeing that Sulen was about to leave, Khan helplessly closed his eyes and said unwillingly, but these old and weak women and children will be sold together with these warriors. Okay. Sulen immediately agreed. Hearing Sulen's quick agreement, Khan didn't know how to react for a moment. There are a total of 126 people here. 6 kinnar for each person, which adds up to 756 kinnar. This is the payment for the goods, you can count it. Sulen took out a bag of money and counted some from it. After that, he threw the remaining kinnar and the bag of money to Khan, not giving him a chance to regret. After receiving the heavy gold coins and seeing that Sulen paid so quickly, he knew that he had made a loss this time. However, he was in a hurry to sell the slaves, so Sulen took advantage of his weakness. After selling those burdens, Khan didn't feel happy at all. He had lost at least 700 gold coins in this deal. He had bought these slaves for 10 kinnar. Then, he had to provide food for these slaves and rent the space. These expenses almost made him bankrupt. Although this deal was a loss, at least he still had 700 gold coins. As long as he was serious and followed his business theory, he would be able to earn it back quickly. Then, Khan's business empire would be set sail. After comforting himself in his heart, Khan quickly completed the deal with Sulen and gave the barbarians slave contracts to Sulen. After putting away the slave contracts, Sulen led the barbarians out of the slave market. With so many slaves, he needed to find a place to settle them down as soon as possible. Fortunately, Sulen was also a noble. He quickly bought an unused military camp from the city hall. This military camp was located in a remote location. It had at least 100 years of history. In the past, Cult was the front line, so there were many standing troops. Later, as the territory expanded, this place was no longer the front line. The standing troops were also disbanded, so the military camp was naturally empty. Many unused military camps had been torn down due to the development of the city. This one was only preserved because of its remote location. As Sulen expected, this military camp was in ruins. Many of the roofs in the camp had collapsed. Fortunately, they did not skimp on the construction. The main body of the building was quite sturdy, and the area of the camp was large enough. As long as the roof was repaired, it would be habitable. Sulen contacted a merchant to buy some materials and hired a craftsman to repair the house. He then went to the training ground in the camp, ready to chat with the slaves he just bought. The barbarians were called barbarians because of their strength. Unlike the Florentines, barbarians were generally around 2.1 meters tall. Sulen's 1.9 meters was already very outstanding among the Florentines. He also practiced martial arts all year round, so his muscles were very strong. However, compared to these barbarians, he was like a little brother. Any adult barbarian could easily crush him in terms of height and muscle. On the training ground, 126 barbarians stood there quietly, staring coldly at Sulen. Although they were slaves, they did not seem to care much about Sulen. Chapter 9. It was easy to win the respect of the barbarians. All he had to do was defeat them. It was also easy to gain their favor. All he had to do was drink with them. Most of the barbarians had simple thoughts. They were not as cunning as the Florentines. Of course, there were exceptions. You should know that I have bought you. From today onwards, you are my slaves. Sulen took out the slave contract and waved it. The barbarians did not say anything. Sulen was not surprised by this. After all, no one wanted to be a slave. You should thank me. If I didn't buy you, you would only end up in the cannon fodder camp. Didn't you buy us to use us as cannon fodder? A barbarian separated his companions, walked out from behind, and stood in front of Sulen. Sulen raised his head and looked at the barbarian. He did not like to talk to people with his head raised. The barbarian in front of him was already 2 meters tall. Even among the barbarians, he was a burly man. Sulen was like a stunted child in front of him. More importantly, this barbarian was very agile. He did not feel clumsy at all. He gave Sulen the feeling of a cheetah in the northern wilderness. Sulen quietly took 2 steps back and adjusted his posture. Finally, he did not have to raise his head to look at him. Of course not. If I wanted to use you as cannon fodder, why would I buy the old, weak, women, and children? You don't plan to use them to threaten us as cannon fodder? The barbarian was silent for a moment and said in a low voice. I am not a soldier. I have nothing to do with the military. Sulen spread his hands and said, besides, I spent so much money not to let you be cheap cannon fodder on the battlefield. I am a noble. I just bought a development order. I need a group of soldiers to follow me to develop my territory in the wilderness. This is the reason why I bought you. Of course, it is very dangerous to develop a territory. However, I can promise that after my territory is developed successfully, your status as a slave will be revoked. You will also become a free person in my territory. Sounds good, but how can we trust you? You have no choice but to trust me. Sulen smiled and said, of course, I can use my reputation as a noble to guarantee that as long as the territory is successfully developed, I will fulfill my promise. In addition, during the initial stages of developing the territory, I can let your family live here. As the most prosperous city in the northern provinces, this place is also the safest. I will provide them with food every month. Of course, you can send someone to supervise every time. After hearing Sulen's conditions, the barbarian, who should be the leader, had already agreed. This was the best outcome. Sulen's method was acceptable to both parties. Leaving the old, weak, women, and children in the city could ensure their safety and also give Sulen peace of mind. If he brought them to the wilderness to develop a territory, Sulen was worried that these barbarians would escape when he wasn't paying attention. After all, they had lived in the wilderness before. We agree. The barbarian grinned, revealing a smile that was uglier than crying. My name is Johnson. I come from the violent bear tribe, but it no longer exists. My name is Sulen. Sulen nodded and said. Now, you will clean up this camp. You will live here temporarily. After I buy you weapons, we will set off to the wilderness to develop a territory. Next, more than 100 barbarians joined in cleaning up the camp. The speed of clearing the camp suddenly increased. Although there were many women and children among these barbarians, these women and children were not weak at all. Although the female barbarians were not as strong as the male barbarians, they were still very strong compared to the Florentines. Have you seen a weak woman carrying 100 or 200 pounds of garbage and walking back and forth? There were also underage children. Each of them was not much worse than an adult Florentine. By night, all the barracks in the camp had been repaired. Sulen rested in the inn. He had to continue to prepare the materials for the development of the camp tomorrow. This group of barbarian warriors added up to 35 people, and each of them was quite strong. They were better than the slave warriors he wanted to buy before. With so many people, he spent more than 700 kinnar. This way, he saved a lot of money. The warriors in the slave market cost about 30 kinnar each, but their combat power was average. Even if the barbarians did not go berserk, they could still easily beat them. If they went berserk, it was not a problem to beat 5 or 6 of them. When the Florentines fought against the barbarian warriors, they relied more on numbers and weapons. Even if the heavily armed soldiers were strong against the barbarians who wore animal skins and used stones or wooden sticks, it was just a last-ditch struggle. In addition, the Florentines were not powerless. Whether it was knights or wizards, they could deal with these barbarians. With more than 4,000 kinnar, it would not cost much to buy weapons for these barbarians. As for armor, 1 leather armor per person would be enough. What? Why didn't they buy iron armor? That thing was so expensive. It started at hundreds of kinnar. Sulen was not so extravagant as to equip these barbarians with heavy armor. Perhaps he would consider these things when he had more money in the future. Right now, the most important thing was the issue of territory. Occupying a territory and clearing out all the monsters in it wouldn't be difficult for Su Luen to do so. The difficult part was defending this territory. After all, if he couldn't guarantee the safety of this territory, and if no free people came to farm it, it would be a rootless tree that couldn't stand on its own. Only when there were free people could Sulen collect taxes. With taxes, his territory could continue to develop. Otherwise, he would not be able to last long if he only relied on his endless investment. For the early development of his territory, he would need to buy a large number of slaves. After all, it was difficult to recruit free people in a new territory, so he could only use slaves. The construction of the territory also required a large number of slaves. He could not ask the barbarians to build houses. These barbarians would probably just build shacks. Expecting them to build houses was better than expecting pigs to fly. Cult was the largest city in the north. There were all kinds of resources here. Sulen could buy all the resources he needed to develop his territory, and the price was relatively cheap. If he was in a border city, he might not even be able to buy all the resources. Even if he could, it would probably cost a lot more. Carriages, food, weapons, seeds, farming tools, tents, and building materials were all bought and piled up in the camp. Among them, food was the most abundant. This was because he had to prepare at least a year's worth of food. Even if he developed his territory this year, there would not be any production. He could only be self-sufficient when the food matured next year. Chapter 10. Originally, Su Luen thought that the 5,000 gold nars he'd borrowed from his cheap brother who didn't even deserve to have a name was already a lot. But when he really got here, he realized that the 5,000 gold nars was only enough for the initial investment. 5,000 kinnar was equivalent to a city's tax for a year, but it was only enough to support 100 regular soldiers. Other than some tattered clothes, the barbarians didn't have anything else. Sulen even had to prepare clothes for them. He brought the group of brutes to the west market of Cult City. It was the biggest market in the city. Needless to say, bringing along 32-meter-tall burly men to swagger through the streets was truly outrageous. Most of these barbarians were topless, and each of them had scars on their bodies. Each of them had bulging muscles and tattoos on their bodies. Coupled with their stoic faces, TSK, their aura was truly tyrannical. Walking on the street, a 3-meter-wide barrier formed around them. Sulen looked like a hedonistic young master with a group of bullies. Unfortunately, he didn't meet any hot-blooded youths who liked to fight for justice. Sulen even prepared to teach them a lesson and let them experience the harsh beating of society. When they arrived at the West Market, Sulen brought the barbarians to the shop where he had pre-ordered the goods. As the kinnar was spent like flowing water, carts after carts of goods were brought back. Even the barbarians had changed into new clothes. Those rough-looking men were wearing brand-new leather armor and holding sharp axes. Their palms, which were as big as palm leaf fans, were gently rubbing against the skin. Their expressions were as if they were caressing the skin of their lover. That's not right. Su Luen dared to bet that even their wives had never enjoyed such treatment before. Sulen chose two-handed axes for the barbarians. Of course, the axes were made according to the size of the Florentine people. However, the barbarians could lift them with one hand. One could imagine how it would be like if a group of barbarians wielded the axes, activated their berserk state, and charged into the enemy's formation and swung the axes like a windmill. Flesh and blood splattered everywhere, and corpses littered the ground. Especially when facing undisciplined and unarmored monsters in the wilderness, the barbarians were like human meat grinders. Their killing speed was much faster than regular soldiers. Of course, they weren't without weaknesses. The berserk barbarians had their rationality lowered to the lowest. They could only distinguish between friend and foe. Although they were powerful, they had no discipline at all. After the berserk state ended, they would enter a weakened state. During the weakened state, the barbarians' condition would drop by 50% and their stamina would drop to 30%. They were like lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Many times, the barbarian berserkers suffered heavy casualties because they rushed too far and got surrounded. Once the berserk state ended, they would be easily killed. It wasn't that no one wanted to solve this problem. Whether it was the Kingdom of Florence, the Kingdom of Gallant, or even the Elenst Federation in the south, they had all studied this problem. After all, the barbarians were still very powerful when they went berserk. However, they soon discovered that there was no way to solve this problem. If the barbarians maintained their rationality, they wouldn't be able to maintain their berserk state. If they wanted to maintain their berserk state, they would have to lower their rationality. The experiment fell into an endless cycle. In the end, all the countries gave up on this thankless experiment. After spending a day, Su Len finally transported all the resources back. As for whether he was cheated or not, there was no need to worry. Su Len purposely brought more than 30 strong barbarians to intimidate the merchants. If the price they offered was unreasonable or there were problems with the resources, he wouldn't mind letting them have a taste of their own medicine. After preparing all the supplies, Su Len left a month's worth of food for the barbarian women and children in the camp. Then, he led the convoy out of Cult City. To use an old saying, the wheel of history had begun to roll. After leaving Cult City, Sullen's group headed northeast. There were more than a dozen cities of various sizes to the north of Cult City. There were many human settlements around Cult City. This was the actual area under Cult City's control. If Su Len wanted to expand his territory, he could only go further away. After leaving Cult City's area of control, the road became bumpy again. The north was different from the south. There were large stretches of wilderness between the cities. There were many bandits, goblins, kobolds, gnolls, and even humans living in the wilderness. Every once in a while, the garrisons of the surrounding cities would conduct a cleanup in the wilderness near the cities. Their goal was to reduce the number of these creatures. It was unrealistic to say that they had completely cleaned up the area. Goblins and kobolds were like weeds in the wilderness. Moreover, their reproductive abilities were too strong. They were born in groups every time. Even if there was no food, they could still survive by eating grass or even soil. Sullen's group was huge. There were 30 carriages fully loaded with goods. In order to transport these goods, Su Len specially hired a mercenary group. The entire group had more than 100 people. With such a large caravan, the smaller tribes in the wilderness didn't dare to attack at all. They didn't have the ability to do so either. This also made Sullen's plan to take advantage of this opportunity to farm monsters go down the drain. After traveling in the wilderness for 5 days, Sullen's group finally arrived at Blackstone City, the northernmost city of the Kingdom of Florence. It was a small border city with only 5,000 permanent residents. However, it had 1,000 soldiers. The city wasn't large either. Su Len didn't see any human settlements outside the city. It was obviously a fortress city. The caravan didn't enter the city. They went around the city and officially entered the wilderness. From then on, Sullen's group didn't encounter any human cities. At this point, the real test had just begun. After passing Blackstone City, the number of monsters in the wilderness increased significantly. Su Len had found that there were many eyes peeping around the caravan. However, these monsters hiding in the dark didn't directly attack. As the caravan went deeper into the wilderness, there were more and more tails around the caravan. By the 4th day in the wilderness, the number of tails around the caravan had swelled to hundreds. This number was enough to clean up once. He was going to let these barbarians try their axes and see the combat power of these barbarians. In fact, after he officially left the city with these barbarians, his system had already sent a notification. Su Len had an army of 35 people. There were also the attributes of this army on the system panel: Northern Barbarian Guard, number, 35 unit, Barbarian, morale, 85. After these barbarians joined Sullen's army, they directly surpassed the barbarian soldiers and became second-level barbarian warriors. The leader, Johnson, was a barbarian warrior and also a hero unit. Chapter 11. The barbarians were indeed powerful. Level 1 barbarian soldiers already had the sturdy trait. Once they became barbarian warriors, they would gain the berserk skill. Only then would they be qualified to be called berserkers. Sullen's team only had one barbarian warrior. Other than sturdy and berserk, the barbarian warrior also had endurance and whirlwind slash. Only barbarian warriors were qualified to be killing machines. Of course, this was only for low-level monsters. Sturdy, beginner, you are born with a strong body. The power of your bloodline gives you a strong physique. Your strength and physique are permanently increased by 2 points. Berserk, after a long battle, you will awaken the power in your bloodline. When you are angry or excited, you can enter a berserk state. Pain is reduced by 70%, strength is increased by 20%, movement speed is increased by 10%, and intelligence is reduced by 50%. Endurance, after a long period of training and battle, your body has gradually surpassed the limits of a normal person. You will gain a strong life force. Normal injuries will be weakened. Permanently increase your HP by 10 points, your physique by 10 points, and your physique recovery speed is increased by 20%. Whirlwind slash, with your body as the axis, you can spin 180 degrees or more to quickly swing your weapon. The weapon will be imbued with a weak sword aura, causing great damage to enemies around you. Because there were no archers in the army, the barbarians were not skilled in archery, so Su Luen equipped them with axes as long-range weapons. Sure enough, these barbarians had a special preference for axes. They could hit the target at a distance of 30 paces without fail. Stop! Su Len pulled on the reins. The team quickly stopped. Johnson. I'm here, boss. Take your men and clean up those tails as fast as you can. Understood. Johnson rubbed his shiny bald head and grinned, revealing a row of white teeth. He then turned around and yelled, "Brothers, get your weapons. It's time to work. Get your weapons." The other barbarians shouted. Under Johnson's lead, 35 barbarians picked up their axes and charged towards the back of the convoy. The barbarians' formation was messy. Even the new recruits of Cult who had undergone 3 months of training were more orderly than them. However, if one underestimated them, they would suffer a great loss. 30 steps ahead, prepare your axes. Throw freely. The barbarians were tall and long. Before the kobolds, goblins, and gnolls could react, they were already 30 steps away. It was already too late for them to react. A gnoll who looked like a leader hurriedly commanded the monsters to attack. They did not think that a mere 30 humans would be a match for them. Their huge advantage in numbers had inflated their ego. More than 30 hand axes flew into the crowd of monsters. The first one to be hit was a tall gnoll. One of the hand axes hit its head, and the huge force almost cut its head in half. Half of the axe's blade had sunk into the gnoll's head. Even an ogre would not be able to withstand such a serious injury, let alone a gnoll. Due to the close distance and the fact that the gnolls, goblins, and kobolds were standing close together, there was no time to dodge. The monsters in front were hit one after another. The luckier ones only had their limbs chopped off and fell to the ground, wailing in pain. The unluckier ones had their heads cut open and were sent back to the underworld before they could even scream. 2 rounds of throwing axes stunned the monsters. At least a third of them died on the spot, and many more were injured. After 2 rounds of throwing, the barbarians charged into the crowd of monsters. Equipped with new equipment, the barbarians displayed their overwhelming strength against the wasteland monsters that looked like beggars. Facing the wooden sticks and claws of the monsters, the barbarians did not dodge at all. They charged straight at the gnolls and goblins. The powerful force sent the gnolls and goblins flying. Some of the weaker ones had their chests caved in and blood gushed out of their mouths. Before they could land on the ground, they were already dead. After sending the enemies flying, the barbarians did not stop their charge. They raised their sharp axes and slashed at the monsters. The sharp blades cut through flesh like they were cutting through cloth. The wooden sticks and claws had no effect at all. The gnolls, goblins, and kobolds fell in rows as if they were mowing grass. Blood and flesh splattered everywhere, dyeing the ground red. This was especially true for the bald leader. He swung a battle axe the size of a millstone and drove a windmill into the crowd. Wherever he went, gnolls, goblins, and even kobolds were all cut open. Behind him, a bloody path paved with broken limbs was left behind. The heavy casualties scared the wasteland bandits out of their wits. The surviving bandits fled in all directions as fast as they could, afraid that they would be cut down by the barbarians if they were too slow. The entire battle, from beginning to end, only took a few minutes. The barbarians chased after the bandits for a while before returning. The leather armor and axes slowed them down quite a bit. They could not catch up with the frightened bandits at all. Next, the barbarians began to clean up the battlefield. The axes Sulen gave them were not disposable items. Each of them was made of fine iron and cost a kinnar. Sulen was not rich enough to throw away dozens of kinnar in a single battle. The wasteland bandits were as poor as ever. They did not have any spoils of war. It was a thankless task. As soon as the battle ended, Sulen received a system notification. A glorious victory. Your army has just won a battle. In this battle, you have obtained an item, Iron Ingot X1. Battle damage, 0, enemy annihilation, 87 experience gained, 576, experience gained, 300. The other attributes did not change, but the morale of the army rose from 85 to 100. After the battlefield was cleaned up, Johnson came to report the results. Did anyone get hurt? Boss, this equipment is amazing. Only 2 of us got some superficial wounds, but it's not a big deal. We're used to it, Johnson said excitedly as he patted the leather armor on his body. Did you pick up all the axes? Yes, all of them. Johnson and the other barbarians were very careful with their weapons. These metal weapons were something they did not even dare to dream of. In the past, their tribe was similar to the bandits they had just defeated. The best weapon they had was a rusty axe. Now, they treated these weapons like family heirlooms. Chapter 12. Sulen was not surprised by the results of the battle. To him, this was just a normal performance. The difference between the weapons of both parties was like heaven and earth. It was just like how in the history of Sulen's previous life, other than the fact that he was well trained, he had to rely on his equipment to suppress his opponents. The convoy started to move forward once again. After this round of cleansing, there were no longer any traces of people spying on them. The mercenaries in the convoy also became respectful toward the noble, Sulen. Even the speed of the convoy increased by a lot. After moving forward in the wilderness for 5 days, the convoy had already entered the depths of the wilderness. They were now at least 200 kilometers away from the nearest city, Blackrock City. According to the requirements of the expansion order, Sulen could only designate territories that were more than 100 kilometers away from cities. In fact, he had already exceeded this requirement, and the extra area was reserved for the future development of his territory. The expansion order did not specify the size of the territory. Theoretically speaking, as long as one had the ability, one could freely enclose land in the wilderness. Of course, this was only in theory. In fact, ever since the expansion movement started, the largest piece of land developed had not exceeded 300 li. It was because the deeper one went into the wilderness, the stronger the monsters would be. It was said that there had been people who had seen huge dragons in the wilderness. Of course, this news had not been verified. However, it was true that there were land dragons in the depths of the wilderness. This news had been verified by the blood of a noble who had developed the territory. This unlucky noble had barged into the land dragon's territory when he was developing his territory. Then, just as he had started to set up camp, over 200 land dragons had razed his territory to the ground. Even the weakest of land dragons was a middle-grade magical creature, and the stronger ones had inherited the terrifying ability to spit out dragon's breath. Even conferred knights would have to take a detour around such land dragons. Only legendary knights would be able to deal with such magical creatures. In the end, the convoy stopped at a slope surrounded by 2 rivers. Although this slope was called a slope, its highest point was only 5 to 6 meters higher than the surrounding plains. The area was not small, and the 2 rivers surrounded it, forming a flat alluvial plain. Due to the silt, the land here was exceptionally fertile. It was not like the other lands in the wilderness, which could only become mature fields after a few years of cultivation. The area of the plain was not small. Sulen estimated that if the entire plain was reclaimed, it would be at least 50,000 to 60,000 acres. As long as they could gain a foothold here, it would not be a problem to feed tens of thousands of people with this land. This land could be called a treasure land. Sulen quickly decided to build his castle here. In theory, as long as Sulen built a camp here, the surrounding area would be his territory. As for how much he could control, that would depend on his army. Of course, the natives of this land did not recognize the rules of the humans. If they wanted to truly control the territory, they would need a powerful army to reason with them. In the natural world, lions and tigers would leave their scents at the edge of their territory, such as peeing, to warn other lions and tigers not to cross the boundary. As for the humans and natives, they naturally couldn't use this method. The only way was through war. If you win, you'll be the boss of this land. If you lose, you'll get the hell out of here, or you won't even have the chance to run. Since they had decided to build a camp here, the caravan began to get busy. Soon, a temporary camp made of tents was set up on the desolate riverbank. Sulen planned to build his future castle on a slope by the riverbank. That slope was the highest point of the plain. Sulen had just checked it and found that the soil there was hard and suitable for building a city. Although the wilderness looked desolate, it was actually very rich in resources. There were many fish in the 2 rivers. This news made Sulen very happy. It meant that he could save a lot of food. The mercenaries in the caravan had rich experience in camping in the wilderness. The barbarians were also experts in wilderness survival. Soon, they caught many fish from the river. After a simple cleaning, the fresh fish were thrown into the pot. The barbarians found some wild onions, wild ginger, and other spices in the wilderness and cooked them with salt. Not long after, a rich aroma floated above the camp. Even Sulen could feel his stomach churning. 10 days after leaving Cult, Sulen once again enjoyed a delicious meal. This was the plain between the Red Sand River and the White Water River. The abundant water source made this land very fertile. The meandering river was like a long snake spiraling across the land. On both sides of the river were patches of dense reeds. From time to time, some wild ducks and water birds would fly out of the reeds. The whole scene was very peaceful. On a slope in the distance, a simple camp was being built quickly. Other than building a wall, Sulen had to build enough warm houses before winter. The wilderness was very cold in winter. The cold from the extreme north could freeze goblins and kobolds into ice sculptures. Humans were no exception. Sulan had brought more than 100 people with him. Other than the barbarians, the rest were mercenaries and some slaves he had bought. With only these people, even if Sulan let the mercenaries and barbarians join in the construction, it would be very difficult to build a camp in such a short time. However, it was not impossible. The wilderness had enough manpower. Although the goblins and kobolds were weak in battle, they could still carry stones, cut down trees, and dig for foundations. So after the fence of the camp was erected, Su Luan took a team of barbarians to catch slaves. As for the mercenaries, they stayed here to guard the camp in case it was attacked when Su Luan was not there. Although the mercenaries were not as strong as the barbarians, they could still rely on the fence to defend. With the protection of the fence, they could hold on for a while even if there were gnolls, trolls, and ogres. As soon as the camp gave the signal, Sulan would quickly lead the barbarians to help. Soon, Sulan led the barbarians to clean up the wilderness within a 5-kilometer radius with the camp as the center. The goblins, kobolds, and gnolls in the surrounding area were unlucky. The surrounding area was full of small tribes. In the face of more than 30 fully armed barbarians, they could not resist at all. Often, a single charge from the barbarians would cause the entire tribe to collapse. However, Sulan did not want to kill the enemy this time. He wanted to capture slaves. The goblins and kobolds that were escaping in all directions were not easy to capture. Sulan could only split the barbarians into 2 teams. He led one team to attack, and Johnson led the other team to ambush them in advance. This way, they could capture as many slaves as possible. Chapter 13. Sulan didn't know much about battle. After all, he hadn't received proper military education since he was young. He was just a normal university student in his previous life. He wasn't a military student, and he didn't serve in the army. His knowledge of military command came from movies, as well as his interactions with this world. However, after experiencing the era of information explosion, Su Luan also learned a lot about tactics and strategies from other channels, even if he only learned by analogy. Although they were still on par with each other, bullying these barbarians wasn't a problem at all. Soon, Sulan discovered a small tribe. It was a kobold tribe, and there were more than 200 adult kobolds. The entire tribe was built on an empty plot of land, and they used large amounts of reeds and wood to build huts. The entire camp was dirty and messy, and Sulan could smell an unpleasant stench from afar. Warriors, crush them. The barbarians' strength was in breaking through enemy lines. As for formation and defense, they really didn't know that. Therefore, in this situation, commanding didn't have much of an effect. Perhaps the only use was to attack. After Sulan arranged for a team to intercept the kobolds, he led the remaining barbarians in an attack. The kobolds didn't panic at the barbarians' charge. Instead, they rushed forward excitedly. In the wilderness, the courage of the barbarians was proportional to their numbers. The more of them there were, the more courageous they became. When they saw that there were only a dozen of them, they bared their yellowed fangs. Unfortunately, they were facing Sulan's barbarian warriors. These fully armed barbarians didn't care about the kobolds at all. Raise morale. Charge. Sulan used his military tactics on his own troops. The already high morale of 90 immediately rose to 100. The barbarians were very fast. Under Sulan's lead, a dozen barbarians quickly approached the kobold camp. Hand axes. Attack at will. Under Sulan's orders, the barbarians picked up the hand axes at their waists and swung them at the area where the kobolds were concentrated. After 2 rounds of hand axes, they created a gap in the area where the kobolds were concentrated. After creating an opening, Sulan took the lead and led the barbarian warriors forward. With Sulan's strength, he could clear out the entire camp by himself. With the addition of a dozen barbarians, it was like a hot knife through butter, killing all the kobolds he encountered along the way. The battle ended quickly. Sullen's strength had scared the kobolds out of their wits. After only a few minutes of contact, the kobolds began to crumble. After defeating the group of kobolds, Sulen stopped attacking. His main goal this time was not to kill, but to capture slaves. If he killed all the kobolds, who would build his territory for him? Therefore, after defeating them, Sulen consciously drove the kobolds to the place where he had set up an ambush. Leaving a few people behind to clean up the battlefield, Sulen led the rest of the barbarian warriors to chase the kobolds away. The kobolds were not very fast. Even if they were fully armed, the barbarians could still easily keep up. After all, the kobolds were tall and had long legs. One step was equivalent to several steps. They spread out in formation and drove the kobolds in a semicircle in the direction Sulen had set. The barbarians did not chase after them, but maintained a distance of 20 to 30 meters. If they deviated from the path, Sulen would lead the barbarians to correct them. After running for 2 kilometers, the kobolds were driven to the predetermined location. At this time, the kobolds were so tired that they wanted to stick their tongues out. As natives of the wilderness, the kobolds were not known for their endurance. These guys were the lowest level in the wilderness, just like the goblins. Johnson, who had set up an ambush in front, had set up many traps. When the kobolds arrived, the ropes were pulled up one by one. The kobolds running in front did not even have time to react before they fell to the ground. The kobolds at the back wanted to stop, but they were forcefully pushed forward by the kobolds behind them. As a result, rows of kobolds fell to the ground one after another. These exhausted kobolds could not even get up after falling down. They were immediately covered by the barbarians' nets. The remaining kobolds who reacted could not escape. When they stopped and wanted to change directions, they found themselves surrounded by barbarians. In the end, these kobolds trembled in fear and begged for their lives on the ground. Sulen asked the barbarians to tie these kobolds up with ropes. In order to prevent them from escaping, he strung them up. After realizing that the demons in front of them had no intention of killing them, the kobolds were very cooperative. A few of them even helped the barbarians tie themselves up with ropes. In the end, Sulen caught more than 160 kobolds. These were not seriously injured. As for the seriously injured ones, they had already been killed when they were tied up. Sulen did not have any medicine to treat the kobolds. After cleaning up the battlefield, Sulen led the barbarians to drive the kobolds back to the camp. These kobolds were scared out of their wits and did not dare to resist. They obediently followed Sulen's orders and walked towards the camp. In reality, they could not run even if they wanted to. Dozens of kobolds were strung up in a row. With the kobolds' discipline, if they tried to escape, the entire row of kobolds would fall to the ground. Kobolds were called kobolds, but they did not look like dogs. Instead, they looked more like lizards. They did not have the fur of gnolls. Instead, they had black or brown scales. They were short and afraid of strong light. Because their language sounded like dog barking, they were called kobolds. However, they claimed that they were descendants of dragons and had the blood of dragons. Many people thought this was a joke. However, kobolds did no dragon language. It was just that their dragon language was very bad. Furthermore, kobolds were also oviparous. Some mutated kobolds had spell-like abilities and became kobold sorcerers. However, the appearance of kobold sorcerers pulled down the bottom line of all spellcasters. Sulen and the others did not find any kobold sorcerers in the kobold tribe. Even in the human world, only 1 in 1,000 people had the talent to become a spellcaster. The probability of kobolds becoming a kobold sorcerer was not higher than humans. Among all the human races, elves had the highest probability of becoming a spellcaster. Almost all elves knew how to cast spells. However, elves had not appeared for hundreds of years. Chapter 14. When Su Len brought the kobold slaves back to the camp, it was already time for dinner. The barbarians herded the group of kobold slaves and locked them in a simple fence outside the camp. The dinner was sumptuous. There was a lot of fish in the nearby river, so it only took a little effort to get enough fish. The fragrant fish soup paired with the black bread made for a decent dinner. The black bread was bought from Cult. When it was fresh out of the oven, it tasted pretty good. Once it cooled, it became hard enough to be used as a wooden stick. It tasted dry and unpalatable, but there was a benefit to it. It could be stored for a long time without going bad. He sliced the rye bread and soaked it in the delicious and scalding fish soup. The rich soup soon softened the cold and hard rye bread. After absorbing the delicious fish soup, it became soft and delicious. Coupled with the smooth and tender fish meat, his hungry stomach was quickly satisfied. Su Len put down the big bowl in his hand and rubbed his belly comfortably. "Johnson, give the rest of the fish soup and fish bones to the kobolds. Don't let them starve to death." Creatures like kobolds didn't have high requirements for food. Even some leftovers were enough for them. A few barbarians carried a few buckets of fish soup and leftover fish bone black bread to the fence. The kobolds, whose eyes were glowing from hunger, also became restless. If it wasn't for the barbarians leaving a deep impression on them during the day, they would have rushed up to snatch the food. Su Len sent a few barbarians to maintain order and let the kobolds line up to get their food. However, the kobolds didn't have the concept of lining up at all. This was simple. They didn't have the concept of lining up. Each of them was over 2 meters tall with a hardwood stick as thick as an arm. When they saw the kobolds who didn't line up according to the rules, they would hit them with the stick. Soon, the noisy kobolds lined up in a crooked line to get their food. The next morning, Su Len arranged for the kobolds to work. Under the whip of the barbarians, the kobolds quickly learned to obey orders. With the addition of more than 100 kobolds, the construction speed of the territory more than doubled. Even though the Houndhead men couldn't do detailed work, they could still do things like digging and logging. What surprised Su Len even more was that even though they had to work hard every day, very few kobolds wanted to escape. These small tribes in the wilderness were often in a state of starvation. Now that they could fill their stomachs, even if they had heavy work to do every day, these kobolds were not willing to leave. Later on, there were even a few overseers among the kobolds who helped Su Len and the others exploit the kobolds. Moreover, these kobold supervisors were even more outstanding than the barbarians. They were much more ruthless than the barbarians when it came to exploiting their own kind. As a result, the kobold supervisors' work had increased. Over the next few days, Su Len led 35 barbarians and swept through all the tribes within a 20-kilometer radius of the camp. In total, they destroyed 1 Jackalan tribe, 2 goblin tribes, and 1 kobold tribe. This time, they obtained more than 300 goblins and 100 kobolds. As for the Jackalans, Su Len ordered them to be killed. Other than the barbarians in the camp who could suppress the Jackalans, the mercenaries couldn't. Once Su Len led the barbarians to patrol the territory, who knew if the Jackalans would rebel? Moreover, there were more goblins and kobolds in the camp. Su Len didn't think that these guys would be obedient. Moreover, the Jackalans ate 4 to 5 times more than the kobolds, but they only did 2 to 3 times more work. Therefore, killing them directly was the best choice. With the goblin and kobold slaves, the construction of the territory sped up. The first thing to be completed was the wall of the territory. In order to protect the territory, the construction of the wall was prioritized. Because of the lack of manpower and the short time, the wall wasn't made of brick, which was commonly seen in the Kingdom of Florence. Instead, it was made of mud and wood. Wooden stakes were driven into the foundation, then mud and reeds were used to build the wall. The entire territory's wall was close to a square, and the length of the four sides added together was close to 2 kilometers. A wall of this scale could be considered a medium-sized town in the Kingdom of Florence. For a newly developed camp, it was already quite big. Just after the construction of the territory's wall was completed, Su Len heard a cold and emotionless electronic sound. Ding! The construction of the territory's wall is completed. Your territory has completed a basic construction, and the territory interface is officially opened. Territory, unnamed, area, 20 kilometers with the camp as the center. City, none, crude camp, popular sentiment, 60 tax, 0, income, loss. Population, 45 slaves, 35 barbarians, 337 goblin slaves, 352 kobold slaves, 40 mercenaries. Supplies, 34 wheeled carriages, 200 units of food, 20 units of bacon, 1 unit of food is equivalent to 100 kilograms. Barbarians need 2 kilograms of food and 1 kilogram of fish per day. Mercenaries need 1 kilogram of food and half a kilogram of fish per day. Slaves need 1 kilogram of food and 2 meals per day. Kobolds and goblins need 1 kilogram of food and some fish soup per day. Currently, the food stored can last for 4 months. Existing buildings, wall, basic. Wall, basic wall made of a mixture of logs, mud, and reeds. It has a certain protective function. Although it looks broken and seems unreliable, it can resist ordinary attacks in the wilderness. Wall defense plus 20, durability plus 50, stability plus 10. With a wall, the territory has more security. Su Len looked at the data about the territory in his mind and rubbed his face hard. This kind of poor territory, any knight's territory in the south was better than his. The whole territory not only had no income, but it also had to charge money. In addition to these attributes, there was also a directory of constructible buildings in the system, Lord's Castle. The Lord's Castle is the residence and official residence of the Lord, and it has defensive ability. It is the administrative center of the territory, and its existence represents the sovereignty and stability of this area. Administration plus 50, stability plus 20, rule plus 40, prestige plus 50. The Lord's Castle can train administrative personnel for the territory. Barracks. The barracks have good training facilities, and can continuously train qualified troops for the territory. Also living in the barracks can let the troops in a training state. Comfort minus 20, iron blood plus 20, training plus 20, stability plus 30, morale plus 20. Residential houses. The residential houses of the territory's residents, and can provide shelter from the wind and rain, increasing the sense of belonging. Stability plus 30, popular sentiment plus 20, prosperity plus 10, population growth plus 10. Chapter 15. Arable land. The arable land within the walls can continue to produce food when the territory is besieged, helping the territory survive the crisis. The food produced from the arable land can be used to feed the residents and increase the population. A strong agriculture is the foundation of a country. Harvest plus 20, stability plus 20, prosperity plus 10. Trading market. This is the main commercial area in the territory. It can bring in a lot of money and is one of the main sources of the territory's funds. Trade plus 30, prosperity plus 30, taxes plus 30, security minus 10. Roads. If you want to be rich, you have to build roads first. A good road will bring a lot of convenience to your territory. Movement speed plus 10, prosperity plus 15, stability plus 15. Security. Maintain the security of the city and fight crime. When the territory's population increases, all kinds of crime will naturally appear. You need a security team and a security officer to manage it. Security plus 20, popular sentiment plus 20, crime -5, intimidation +15. Beacon Tower. Building a beacon tower can quickly transmit information within the territory and warn the territory in advance. Communication +30, stability +20. Lumber mill. The lumber mill can provide a lot of wood for the territory and is very important for the development of the territory. At the same time, it can provide a source of funds for the territory. Work efficiency +20, prosperity +5. Port. The territory has 2 rivers. These rivers provide the territory with a strong transportation capacity and abundant fishing. The cost of using ships to transport goods is very low. At the same time, it can be used for military purposes. Relying on ships, the army can quickly disembark from the 2 rivers. Shipping +20, fishing +25, prosperity +15. Well, the well can provide the territory with a clean water source. At the same time, when the city is besieged, the city will not lack water. Hygiene +15, security +15. Although the territory did not lack food, there was a saying that people without foresight would have immediate worries. Therefore, Sulen set aside some land within the walls to cultivate. At the same time, he also sent some people to build the port and fishing boats in order to obtain more fish. As everyone knew, if the human body did not consume fat, meat, and high-protein food, then the daily consumption of grain would be several times higher. Now that there were abundant fish, the consumption of food would be greatly reduced. At the same time, the salted fish made from fish could be stored for a long time. Sulen had already investigated the Red Sand River and the White Water River. These 2 rivers were wide and the water flow was stable. The water plants on both sides were dense and there were many reeds. The surrounding beasts often came here to drink water. In the reeds on the banks, there were many water birds. Sulen also sent some people to the reeds to get the eggs. These birds would build nests and incubate chicks in the reed marshes. Each nest would contain several eggs. According to Sulen's request, each time he touched the eggs in the reed marshes, he could only take half of the eggs at most, and he could not touch the nest repeatedly. In this way, he could obtain a lot of eggs without reducing the number of waterfowl. From then on, egg drop soup was added to the daily meals in the camp. To be honest, the food prepared in Sulen was much better than the free people in Cult City. After all, it was impossible for free people to have fish and eggs for every meal. The Red Sand River and the White Water River meandered to the southeast. Sulen guessed that the 2 rivers would either flow into the ocean or a large lake. If these 2 rivers eventually converged into the ocean, he might be able to use this waterway to go out to sea and do business with the outer islands and other countries. However, this would have to wait until his territory was developed. After setting aside a portion to build the port and farmland, the rest of the slaves began to build Sulen's castle. As the center of the territory, the lord's castle had to be completed as soon as possible. After Sulen gave the blueprint to a few slave craftsmen, they directed the other slaves to continue building the territory. In fact, Sulen's territory already had a plan. This plan was made by the system. The west and north of the territory were the Red Sand River and the White Water River. The port was built there, and the market was also going to be built there. Due to the convenience of transportation, Sulen planned to turn this place into a business district. The east of the territory was the military camp, and the lord's castle was located on the central axis of the city, facing south. The entire territory was symmetrical. After that, Sulen continued to lead the barbarians to patrol his territory. After this period of fighting, Sulen finally leveled up. In addition to him leveling up, 5 barbarians also successfully leveled up from level 2 to level 3 barbarian warriors. Sulen had reached level 13 after leveling up. Name, Sulen race, human level, 13, 3281300000, strength, 26 dexterity, 28 spirit, 19 vitality, 25 charm, 18 in addition to the 2 attribute points from before, he now had 4 undistributed attribute points, a silver chest, and 3 attribute points. After opening the silver chest, Su Lin obtained a skill book called Stonewall Formation from the chest. After the system integrated the rules of this world, this skill had also undergone some changes. It had a new name, Mud to Stone. After using this skill, one could quickly create several stone walls. This spell was very useful whether it was used to create a formation on the battlefield or to build a territory. Su Lin thought for a moment and learned this skill. Mud to Stone required 2 skill points to learn. After learning it, he discovered that this skill could be used in 2 ways. One was mud to stone, and the other was the opposite, stone to mud. Next, Su Lin tested it again. As a yellow light entered his feet, the soil under his feet suddenly arched up. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a wall, and the wall turned into stone in a breath. Su Lin walked to the stone wall and gently knocked on it a few times with his hand. It was indeed a stone wall. The stone wall in front of him was 10 meters long, 3 meters high, and 50 centimeters thick. The defense of the stone wall was higher than that of ordinary stone. Su Lin felt his magic. He could continuously create 6 stone walls of this size, and then his magic would be exhausted. He now had 190 points of magic. 1 point of spirit was equivalent to 10 points of magic. Creating a stone wall would consume 30 points. Similarly, turning a stone wall into mud would consume 30 points of magic. Compared to the magic consumption, this spell was very useful. Su Lin still had 4 free attribute points. This time, he added all of them to his spirit. His spirit became 23 points, and 230 points of magic could create 7 stone walls. The heal that he learned previously only consumed 10 points of magic each time. Now that he was in his best condition, he could continuously use the heal 23 times. Chapter 16. He had tested the effects of life heal before. It could quickly heal injuries on himself or others. However, it could only heal minor injuries such as broken bones. It was much less effective. Of course, it was still much faster than natural recovery. In the next few days, Su Lin would take some time to cast mud to stone on the walls of his territory. The mud walls were turned into stone walls. Every morning, after using up all his mana, Su Lin would bring his men to patrol the camp. When his mana was almost recovered, he would come back and cast mud to stone again. In just a few days, one of the walls had been turned into a stone wall. In addition to clearing out the goblins, kobolds, and gnolls in his territory, Su Lin used a parchment to draw the rough terrain of his territory. What surprised him was that after he finished drawing the map, the system also activated the strategic map. The strategic map of the system was worlds apart from the one he drew. His map could only show the rough terrain of the area, but the strategic map of the system was amazing. It was completely scaled down to a certain scale. What surprised Su Lin even more was that the strategic map could be zoomed in or out. However, this strategic map only showed the part of Sulin's territory. The areas beyond the territory were all black and could not be seen. At his location, there was an obvious mark of a small person on the map. Around the small person, there were dots that represented other people. This range was about 100 meters. After this range, it was no longer displayed. Su Lin studied it for a while. The green dots represented his companions and subordinates. All the barbarians were of the same color. The mercenaries were yellow. As for the slaves, they were blue. In the battle map, people or monsters that were hostile to him were marked with red dots. Having the strategic map was a great help to him. It allowed him to have a god's perspective. The battlefield was one-sided and transparent to him. Not only could he command the army better, but he could also be the first to know if the enemy was plotting something. In addition to these, the map had detailed markings on the hills, rivers, forests, and plains within the territory. Although it was only some basic information, it wasn't easy to obtain such detailed information even in the 21st century, let alone in a world with a civilization level that was only in the middle world. Su Len tried to shrink the map. Soon, the area that represented his territory on the map shrank to a barely visible spot. Obviously, the size of this world was unexpectedly large. When he returned to the camp, it was still bustling with activity. 50 mu of farmland in the camp had been cultivated, and 200 mu of farmland outside the camp had been cultivated. In order to increase grain production, potatoes were planted in these farmlands. Compared to wheat, the yield of potatoes was several times higher. Although there was a lack of fertilizer in this world and the variety of potatoes was not as good as in his previous world, the yield of potatoes here was still more than 500 kilograms. As for wheat, the yield in the south could reach 400 kilograms, while in the north it was only 300 kilograms. More importantly, even in the cold climate of the north, potatoes could be easily cooked twice a year. In this way, 1 mu of potatoes could produce 6 to 8 times more food than wheat. As long as Su Len had a brain, he would know what to do. Only when he had a firm foothold here would Su Len slowly change part of the potato farmlands to wheat. After all, white bread made from wheat flour tasted good. Similarly, the port in the northwest of the territory was almost completed. Because there were no ships docking at the moment, the port wasn't built too big. So far, the port was used for fishing. There was no lack of trees in the wasteland. After the kobolds and gnomes cut down the trees, there were naturally craftsmen who went to build fishing boats. Although the trees that hadn't been dried were not good materials for making boats, they couldn't care less. The fishing boats that were made directly from logs had a short lifespan. It was estimated that they would be damaged or deformed in 3 months. However, there was no problem for them to be used for fishing. Because of the abundance of fish in the river, although there were only 5 or 6 fishing boats, they could catch 200 to 300 kilograms of fish every day. It could be said that just the fish here were enough to supply the camp's food. The excess fish had been pickled with salt, and while the sun was still scorching, these salted fish were dried and stored. In order to store food, Su Len built a large enough warehouse in the camp. The supplies brought by the 30 carriages and the things collected during this period were all stored in the warehouse. This warehouse was the most important thing in the camp. Even Sullen's lord's castle wasn't completed yet, but this warehouse was already built. In order to protect these supplies, Su Len assigned 5 barbarians to guard the warehouse day and night. Other people, including the hired mercenaries, were not allowed to come within 30 meters of the warehouse. The lord's castle was also under construction, but it was still far from completion. He didn't want to make do with his own residence, so the foundation of the lord's castle was still being laid. He planned to build the lord's castle entirely out of stone. He would first use mud to tamp it down, then use mud to rock to turn the mud into stone. In addition to these, the roads in the territory were also being built. Su Len had too many complaints about the roads in this world. Even in prosperous cities like Cullen City and Cult City, all the roads were muddy except for the main roads. Many places were filled with dirty water. All kinds of excrement, dead rats, household garbage, and unknown objects with strange smells were thrown on the road. The whole city was like a giant toilet. Once it rained, the city would be like an ocean. If one went out at this time, it would feel like they were walking in a cesspool. Su Len would never allow his territory to be like this. So when he was building his territory, he had already prepared to harden the roads or lay a layer of stones. At the same time, he had also prepared drainage facilities in the city. When his territory was officially established, he would also legislate. He would make strict sanitary regulations, forbidding dumping and defecation. All garbage and excrement had to be dumped in designated places and transported out of the city. He would build a fertilizer factory outside the city and ferment the garbage and excrement to make fertilizer. Chapter 17. Although Su Len had lived in this world for more than 10 years, he was still not used to the city environment. Apart from the nobles' district and the merchants' district, the sanitation in the other areas was too poor. Now that he was developing his own territory, Su Len naturally wouldn't let his city become like that. "Boss, look, the signal." Just as Su Len was checking the progress of the construction of the territory, a barbarian warrior pointed to the northeast and shouted. Su Len looked up and saw a cloud of black smoke in the distance. Su Len's eyes flashed as he leaped onto the city wall. After setting up the camp, Su Len had already built a few beacon towers around the territory. These towers were simple in structure. They were made of mud and then turned into stone using mud to rock. There were some things to ignite the fire inside. He had also arranged for people to stand guard on the towers. If they discovered an enemy invasion, they would light the beacon immediately to alert the territory and send a signal. One beacon meant that there were about 100 enemies. 2 beacons meant that there were more than 500 enemies. If there were 3 beacons, it meant that there were more than 1,000 enemies. Su Len stood on the walls of the camp. 2 beacons were clearly visible in the distance. It was obvious that there were at least 500 enemies this time. Seeing this situation, Su Luen didn't delay and immediately ordered all the kobolds and goblins to be locked up in the fence in the camp. He didn't trust these slaves at all. What if these goblins and kobolds rebelled while he was leading people to fight the enemy? As for killing them, what would happen to the construction of the territory? Therefore, he could only lock them up temporarily. Immediately tell everyone to return to the team. Also, tell the mercenaries to help defend. Su Len ordered directly. "Yes, boss." The barbarian warrior beside him immediately ran to pass on the order. After the order was given, the camp immediately became busy. The kobolds and goblins were locked up in the fence, and the 35 barbarian warriors quickly gathered. After this period of battle, half of these barbarian warriors had become barbarian warriors. The leader, Johnson, had even advanced to become a giant axe berserker. This team of barbarian soldiers was much stronger than when they first entered the wilderness. Just as the barbarians finished gathering, the mercenaries also hurried over. "Master Su Len, I think we should abandon this place and leave as soon as possible." As soon as he walked over, Xian, the leader of the mercenaries, said impatiently, "Those gnolls, goblins, and kobolds are still far away from us. If we leave now, we have a great chance of escaping." Su Len looked at Jean coldly until his voice became softer and softer. Finally, he stopped. "Are you done?" Su Len said coldly as he looked at the embarrassed Xian. "If you are, then listen to me. This time, there will be no less than 500 enemies, but the highest number will not exceed 1,000. This is a crisis, but also an opportunity. As long as we can defeat this batch of enemies, then we will have a long period of development in the future. Similarly, if you perform well in this battle, I will give him 20 mu of farmland after the construction of the territory is completed. If he makes enough contributions, I will bestow him the title of a knight." In order to deal with this crisis, Su Len offered enough benefits. It was not easy to become a noble. Now, there was a shortcut in front of them. Hearing Su Len's promise, the low morale of the mercenaries instantly soared. They all rubbed their hands together, and their eyes were filled with eagerness. Su Len was very satisfied with this situation. To be honest, it was not impossible for Su Len to deal with 500 to 600 gnolls. It was mainly because the area of the camp was too big. With only 36 of them, they could not even line up a wall. The gnolls could easily go around the wall and destroy the camp. In this case, even if he killed all the gnolls, it would be useless. Ta. Just as Su Len was mobilizing the mercenaries, a date red horse galloped in the direction of the camp. As it galloped, it shouted, "Military emergency." The surrounding people all dodged and let it pass. Sulen Monseigneur. This is not good. There are 700 enemies this time. In addition to the gnolls, and kobolds, there are also a dozen trolls. The mercenary knight ran to Sulen and agilely jumped off the horse. "Thank you for your hard work. Go and rest." Sulen smiled at him and said, "Take out the white bread and bacon. I remember there is some ale in the warehouse. Take it out this time as well." Sulen said to the barbarian warrior behind him. At this time, to boost morale, Sulen had prepared a sumptuous meal. "Yes, boss. I will take someone to take it out." The barbarian warrior behind him said respectfully. "Also, take out the bacon and sausages. The fish must also be served today." Sulen ordered directly. In this world, apart from the nobles and merchants, everyone else basically had 2 meals a day. This time, because of the upcoming war, lunch was specially added. "I want to see all the warriors and mercenaries eat meat this afternoon." "Yes, Monseigneur. I will prepare it immediately." The chef was sweating profusely and said nervously. The fish were cut open one by one. In the empty space in the middle of the camp, a dozen large pots were boiling hot water. The slaughtered fish were cut into pieces and then placed directly into the pot to cook. Pieces of bacon and sausages were thrown into the pots after being cut. Although the chef's skills were not very good, the enticing aroma still made people swallow their saliva uncontrollably. The people did not have to wait for too long. The food was finally ready. Sulen picked up a bowl and filled it with delicious meat soup. He then took a piece of white bread and took a bite. Seeing that Sulen was the first to eat, the mercenaries and barbarians swarmed forward and took their share. The meat soup was delicious. There were mushrooms, bacon, and ham in it. Sulen found a rock and squatted on it to drink the soup. The barbarian warrior was also very quiet. He sat on the ground with a bowl of meat soup and a piece of white bread in one hand. According to the previous reports, there were more than 700 enemies this time. Half of them were goblins and kobolds, about 300 to 400 of them. The rest were gnolls and a dozen trolls. Trolls were a powerful creature. They were far more powerful than gnolls. They were very strong and liked to use maces. However, their strongest point was their terrifying regenerative ability. Broken limbs could be regrown. Only magic, fire, or strong acid could truly kill them. P.S. There were some problems with the contract, so it was remailed. It will probably be fixed on Monday. You're tuning into the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.